I'm standing in our Los Angeles living room, holding a stack of bank statements that don't make sense, and my husband is 30 feet away in his home office, laughing on the phone about something. The numbers in front of me are screaming fraud, and all I can hear is his carefree voice drifting down the hallway. 3 months ago, I would have set these papers down and convinced myself I was overreacting. But not anymore. Not after what I found tucked in the back of his desk drawer, hidden behind tax returns from 2019. Not after I saw my own signature on documents I never signed, transferring money I never authorized. The woman I was 3 months ago is gone. What's left is someone I'm still getting to know. Let me take you back to where this really started. Before the bank statements, before the forged signatures, before my entire world imploded. We're talking about early spring, when the jacaranda trees were blooming purple all over our neighborhood in West LA, and I was still living in what I thought was a solid marriage. 30 years, 3 decades of building a life together, of believing in the man sleeping next to me every night. His name is Richard, and if you'd asked me 6 months ago to describe him, I would have said devoted, hardworking, maybe a little distant sometimes, but aren't all men who provide for their families? He traveled constantly for work, or so he told me. Business development, client meetings, conferences in cities I'd never visit. I accepted it, because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You trust them. I remember the first time I noticed something off. It was small, insignificant really. Just a comment he made about being in Denver when I could have sworn he said Phoenix. I brushed it off. Memory plays tricks, I told myself. But then it happened again, and again. Cities getting mixed up, timelines that didn't quite align, hotel names he couldn't quite remember. I started keeping a mental list, not because I suspected anything terrible, but because it nagged at me like a pebble in your shoe. You know that feeling when something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on it? That was my life for months before everything exploded. The house we lived in was beautiful. One of those Spanish revival homes with the arched doorways and tile roof, the kind of place you see in movies about California dreaming. We'd bought it 25 years ago when the neighborhood was still affordable, before the tech money pushed prices into the stratosphere. Richard always handled the finances. He was good with numbers, or so I believed. I worked part-time at a nonprofit, nothing glamorous, just enough to feel useful and keep my own small checking account. The bulk of our money came from his consulting business, which I understood in only the vaguest terms. Something about helping companies streamline operations. He'd tried to explain it once, and my eyes glazed over after 5 minutes. I trusted him to manage things. That trust would cost me everything. The discovery happened on a Tuesday afternoon in May. I can tell you the exact date if you want, but what matters is that it was an ordinary day that became extraordinary in the worst possible way. Richard was supposedly in Seattle for a 3-day conference. I was home alone, looking for our property tax records because I needed them for something. I don't even remember what now. His home office was off limits usually, his private space where he worked, but he wasn't there to care, and I needed those documents. The filing cabinet was locked. Of course it was. But I knew where he kept the key, hidden under a stack of old National Geographic magazines on the bookshelf, because I'd seen him retrieve it once years ago. When I opened that drawer, I wasn't looking for anything suspicious. I just wanted tax records. But there, tucked behind a manila folder labeled 2019 returns, was a thin stack of papers held together with a binder clip. I pulled them out. Bank statements from an account I didn't recognize. My name was on them, my social security number. But I'd never opened this account. The statements showed regular transfers, thousands of dollars at a time, moving from what I realized was our joint savings into this mystery account. And the signatures on the authorization forms looked like mine, but they weren't. They were close, eerily close, but I know my own handwriting, and this wasn't it. Someone had forged my signature. I sat down hard in his desk chair, the papers shaking in my hands. My first thought, and I'm ashamed to admit this, was that I'd done something wrong. Had I signed these and forgotten? Was I losing my memory? I was 53 years old, not ancient, but maybe early dementia or something. It's amazing how quickly we turn on ourselves, how fast we assume we're the problem rather than considering that someone we love might be betraying us. I spent 20 minutes sitting there trying to remember signing anything related to this account before it hit me with cold clarity. These signatures were forgeries. Richard had been stealing from me. Have you ever had a moment where your entire reality shifts? Where everything you thought you knew gets turned inside out? That's what this was. I looked around his office, really looked at it for the first time in years. The expensive desk he'd bought last year, the new computer monitor, the leather chair I was sitting in. Where had all that money come from? We weren't struggling, but we weren't rolling in it either. Or so I thought. Now I'm seeing receipts scattered across his desk for restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel stays he'd told me were covered by clients. Nothing made sense anymore. I took photos of everything with my phone. Every statement, every forged signature, every suspicious transaction. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be. Maybe shock has a way of making you functional when you should be falling apart. I put the papers back exactly as I'd found them, locked the cabinet, returned the key to its hiding place. Then I walked into our bedroom, the room where we'd slept together for 3 decades, and I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. I didn't cry. That would come later. Right then, I was just trying to process what my life had become. The thing about discovering a betrayal like this is that you immediately start questioning everything. Every conversation, every affectionate gesture, every moment of what you thought was intimacy, it all gets re-examined through a new lens. Was any of it real? Did he ever love me? Or was I just convenient? A name to forge, an account to drain, a wife too trusting to ask hard questions? I went back through years of memories and couldn't find solid ground anywhere. It's a special kind of torture, that retroactive doubt. It steals not just your present, but your past, too. When Richard came home from his supposed Seattle trip 3 days later, I was calm, eerily calm. I'd spent 72 hours thinking, planning, deciding what to do next. He walked in with his rolling suitcase and a tired smile, kissed my cheek like he always did, asked what was for dinner. I told him I'd ordered Thai food, his favorite. We ate at the dining room table and talked about nothing important, his meeting, the weather, whether we needed to get the air conditioning serviced before summer hit hard. He had no idea that I knew. No idea that the woman sitting across from him eating pad thai was gathering evidence and plotting her next move. That's when I realized something crucial about myself. I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. Richard had always been good at making me doubt myself. Not in obvious ways, nothing you could point to and say there, that's manipulation. It was subtle, a raised eyebrow when I expressed an opinion he disagreed with, a gentle suggestion that maybe I was remembering things wrong, a way of explaining things that made me feel stupid for not understanding. Over the years, it had worked. I'd learned to defer to him, to assume he knew better, to trust his version of reality over my own. But sitting there across from him, knowing what I knew, I felt something shift inside me. The doubt was still there, sure, but underneath it was anger. Cold, clear anger that cut through everything else like a knife. That night, after he fell asleep, I got up and went back to his office. I needed to know how deep this went, how long he'd been doing this, what else he might be hiding. I spent hours going through files, carefully photographing anything that looked suspicious, more forged documents, more mysterious accounts, loans taken out in both our names that I'd never agreed to, business ventures I'd never heard of. The scope of his deception was staggering. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was systematic, calculated, years in the making. He'd been stealing from me for at least 5 years, maybe longer, and I'd been so blind. I blamed myself. Of course I did. That's what we do, isn't it? When someone we love hurts us, We immediately ask what we did to deserve it. I must have pushed him to this somehow. Maybe I wasn't attentive enough, wasn't interesting enough, wasn't whatever he needed. Maybe our marriage had been struggling, and I just hadn't noticed. Maybe I'd said something years ago that made him feel like he couldn't be honest with me. I twisted myself into knots trying to find a way to make his betrayal my fault. It took me weeks to realize how messed up that was. He made the choice to forge my signature. He made the choice to steal. He made the choice to lie to me every single day for years. That was on him, not me. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I missed or chose to ignore. The way he always insisted on handling our finances alone. The way he got defensive if I asked too many questions about money. The way he changed passwords on accounts without telling me. The business trips that seemed to multiply year after year. The vague explanations that didn't quite add up. I'd excused all of it because I trusted him, because I wanted to believe in our marriage, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. But the truth is, I'd been living with a stranger for years and didn't even know it. You know what's worse than the betrayal itself? The way it makes you doubt everything about yourself. I started questioning every decision I'd ever made, every instinct I'd ever had. If I'd been this wrong about Richard, what else was I wrong about? Could I trust my own judgment about anything anymore? It's like someone had gone through my entire life and erased all the solid ground, leaving me standing on quicksand. I'd get up in the morning and look at myself in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back. Who was I if I wasn't Richard's wife? What was my life if everything I thought I knew was a lie? The sacrifice I'd made over the years was invisible but real. I'd given up pieces of myself so gradually that I didn't notice them going. My boundaries had dissolved one conversation at a time, one concession at a time, one moment of putting his needs before mine at a time. I'd learned to make myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable. I'd learned to apologize for things that weren't my fault and to accept explanations that didn't really explain anything. I'd learned to ignore the voice in my head that said, "Something's wrong here," because trusting that voice meant confronting things I wasn't ready to face. For 30 years, I'd been slowly disappearing, and I hadn't even realized it until it was almost too late. But here's the thing about hitting bottom. Sometimes that's where you finally find your footing. After weeks of drowning in doubt and self-blame, something in me snapped. I was cleaning out the garage one Saturday morning while Richard was supposedly at the office, and I came across boxes of my old stuff from before we got married. My college textbooks, photos of me with friends I'd lost touch with, a journal I'd kept in my 20s full of dreams and plans, and a version of myself who was bold and certain. I sat there on the concrete floor surrounded by dust and memories, and I thought, what happened to her? When did I stop being that person? That's when I decided I was done being a victim, done making excuses for him, done twisting myself into knots trying to understand why he'd done this. It didn't matter why. What mattered was that he had, and I had a choice about what happened next. I could stay and continue living this lie, or I could fight back. I could gather evidence, build a case, expose what he'd done. I could take back some control over my own life. For the first time in months, I felt something other than sadness or confusion. I felt determined. Angry, yes, but in a way that felt clarifying rather than destructive. This anger had a purpose. This anger was going to save me. I started documenting everything. Every forged signature, every suspicious transaction, every inconsistency in his stories. I opened a separate email account he didn't know about and sent myself copies of everything I found. I took photos, scanned documents, created a timeline of his deceptions. I became methodical about it, almost obsessive. At night, I'd lie next to him in bed, feeling his warmth, hearing his breathing, and I'd be thinking about evidence and strategies and next steps. The intimacy was gone. How could it not be? I was sleeping next to someone who'd been systematically robbing me for years. Every touch felt like a violation. Every kiss felt like another lie. but I didn't let on that anything had changed. That was the hardest part, pretending everything was normal, smiling when he walked in the door, cooking dinner, asking about his day, laughing at his jokes. I became an actress in my own life, playing the role of the trusting wife while secretly gathering ammunition. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. I needed time to figure out my next move, and I couldn't afford to tip him off before I was ready. So I performed normalcy day after day, while inside I was planning his downfall. The breaking point came at a family gathering in July. My sister was hosting a barbecue at her place in Santa Monica, one of those casual summer afternoons with too much food and kids running around and everyone talking over each other. Richard was there, charming as always, telling stories about his travels, making people laugh. I was standing near the kitchen, loading my plate with potato salad, when I overheard him talking to my brother-in-law by the grill. He was saying something about having to go to Dallas next week for meetings, and my brother-in-law was asking him about his frequent travel, saying it must be exhausting, and Richard was shrugging it off, saying it's part of the job, you know how it is. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. The casual lie, delivered so smoothly. The comfortable deception. I realized in that moment that he'd been doing this not just with me, but with everyone. Our friends, our family, everyone in our life had been fed the same lies, the same carefully constructed version of reality. And they all believed him because why wouldn't they? Richard was likable, successful, trustworthy. Or so we all thought. I set down my plate, suddenly not hungry, and walked to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror, my sister's floral hand soap and decorative towels reflected behind me, and I made a decision. It was time to stop hiding what I knew. Later that afternoon, I saw Richard step away from the crowd to take a phone call. He walked toward the side yard, thinking he was out of earshot. But I followed him, staying far enough back that he wouldn't notice me. I watched him pull out his phone, heard him say something about confirming the reservation, something about making sure everything was set for Thursday. His voice had that tone, the one he used when he was trying to sound important and efficient. Then he laughed at something the person on the other end said, this casual, relaxed laugh that made my blood boil. While I was drowning in confusion and betrayal, he was making restaurant reservations and laughing on the phone like he didn't have a care in the world. When we got home that evening, I waited until he went upstairs to change out of his barbecue clothes. Then I went to his office, found his phone sitting on the charger where he'd left it, and I looked through his messages. I know, invasion of privacy, but at this point I was way past caring about normal relationship boundaries. What I found confirmed everything I'd suspected. Messages about meetings that had nothing to do with his supposed consulting business. Confirmations for hotel rooms in cities he'd told me he wasn't visiting. Restaurant reservations for 2. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was living an entire separate life. I thought about confronting him right then, throwing the evidence in his face and demanding answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was strategy. Or maybe I just wasn't ready yet. So I took screenshots of everything, sent them to my secret email account, put his phone back exactly where I'd found it, and went upstairs. Richard was in the shower. I could hear the water running, hear him humming something off-key. I sat on the edge of our bed and thought about how many times I'd heard that same sound over 3 decades. How many showers, how many mornings. How many mundane domestic moments that had seemed so solid and real. All of it built on lies, all of it empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that statistic I'd read somewhere, that in Los Angeles, after they passed mandatory reporting laws for financial exploitation, the number of cases increased 6 times. 6 times, because people were finally speaking up, finally reporting what was being done to them. I wasn't alone in this. Somewhere in this city, there were other people discovering the same kind of betrayal, feeling the same confusion and rage. It didn't make it hurt less, but it made me feel less isolated. And it made me think about what reporting might look like for me. Could I go to the police? Would they even take me seriously? These were documents with my name on them, my signatures, even if they were forged. How would I prove it? The next morning, I did something I should have done weeks ago. I called my sister and asked if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us. I needed to talk to someone, needed to say out loud what was happening before I went completely insane. We met at a cafe in Westwood, one of those places with distressed wood tables and overpriced lattes. I ordered a cappuccino I barely touched and told her everything. The forged signatures, the mysterious accounts, the business trips that weren't what they seemed. She listened without interrupting, her face getting paler with every detail I shared. When I finished, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. She told me I needed to talk to a lawyer immediately. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. She pulled out her phone and called someone she knew, a family law attorney she'd heard good things about, and made me an appointment for the following day. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said I hadn't done anything wrong, that none of this was my fault, that Richard was the one who'd betrayed every promise he'd ever made. I needed to hear that so badly. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't making something out of nothing. The validation was like oxygen after being underwater for too long. That meeting with the lawyer changed everything. Her name was Patricia, late 40s, sharp suit, no-nonsense demeanor. She sat across from me in her downtown office and listened to my story with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered. When I finished, she asked if I had documentation. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken, the screenshots, the timeline I'd built. She nodded slowly, making notes on a legal pad. And then she looked up at me and said, "This is fraud. This is forgery. This is potentially criminal, not just grounds for divorce." Hearing her say those words out loud, in that official legal context, was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it meant my marriage was truly over, that there was no walking this back or finding a way through. Liberating because it meant I had options, that I wasn't powerless, that there were actual consequences for what Richard had done. Patricia laid out a strategy. Document everything. Don't tip him off. Open accounts in my name, only that he couldn't access. Start separating my finances from his. And most importantly, she said, start thinking about what I wanted my life to look like after this was over. Because it was going to be over, one way or another. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months, even though nothing had actually changed yet. Just having a plan, having someone in my corner who believed me and knew what to do, it made all the difference. I walked back to my car through the downtown streets, past business people on lunch breaks and tourists taking photos, and I thought about how none of them knew what I was going through. How we all walk around carrying these private devastations, these hidden betrayals, and the world just keeps spinning like nothing's wrong. But something was wrong. My entire life was wrong. And I was finally ready to do something about it. Over the next few weeks, I followed Patricia's instructions to the letter. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one Richard had no connection to. I started redirecting my paycheck there. I gathered every financial document I could find, made copies of everything, stored originals in a safe deposit box he didn't know about. I was meticulous, methodical, turning my anger into action. And through it all, I kept playing the role of the devoted wife. It was getting harder, though. Every time he kissed me goodbye before another supposed business trip, every time he called to say goodnight from some hotel room, I wanted to scream at him. But I didn't. I smiled and said, "I love you too," and waited for the right moment to burn his world down. That moment came in late August, though not in the way I'd planned. I was at home one evening. Richard was supposedly in San Francisco, and I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was hesitant, apologetic. It was a woman named Jennifer who said she'd gotten my number from our church directory. She asked if we could meet in person, said it was important, said it was about Richard. My stomach dropped. What now? What else was there to discover? But I agreed to meet her the next day at a coffee shop near our house. Jennifer turned out to be around my age, well-dressed, nervous. She sat across from me and told me a story that made my blood run cold. She'd been friends with a woman who dated Richard years ago, before he and I got married. This woman had confided in Jennifer about a pattern of financial manipulation, of loans taken out in her name without permission, of forged signatures. It had happened 35 years ago, and the woman had never reported it because Richard had convinced her she'd somehow authorized everything and just forgotten. She'd spent years doubting her own memory, her own sanity. When Jennifer heard through mutual friends that I was married to Richard, she'd wanted to warn me but didn't know how. Then she'd heard rumors recently, whispers that I might be going through something similar, and she felt she had to reach out. I sat there listening to her, feeling the room tilt around me. This wasn't a one-time thing with Richard. This wasn't even a recent development. This was a pattern, possibly decades old, a way of operating that he'd perfected over years, with multiple victims. I was just the latest. The realization was crushing and clarifying at the same time. Crushing because it meant our entire marriage had been built on lies from day one. Clarifying because it meant this wasn't about me, wasn't about something I'd done wrong. This was who Richard was, a predator who targeted women, gained their trust, and exploited them financially. I thanked Jennifer for telling me, for having the courage to reach out. After she left, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called Patricia. I told her what I'd learned, and there was a long pause on the other end. Then she said something that changed the direction of everything. She said if Richard had done this before, there might be other victims out there. And if there were other victims, we might be able to build a case strong enough to ensure he faced real consequences. Not just divorce, not just financial settlements, criminal charges, prison time, actual justice. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for that woman from 35 years ago who'd been gaslit into doubting her own reality. I was fighting for any other women Richard might target in the future if I didn't stop him now. This was bigger than my marriage, bigger than my broken heart. This was about making sure a predator couldn't keep preying on people, and I was going to do whatever it took to make that happen. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Patricia helped me track down 2 other women who'd had relationships with Richard over the years. Both of them had similar stories of financial manipulation, forged documents, stolen money. We compared notes, shared evidence, built a timeline that spanned decades. It was horrifying and empowering at the same time. Horrifying to see the scope of his deceptions, the number of lives he'd damaged. Empowering to realize we weren't alone, that together we were strong enough to take him down. We also brought in a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud. She went through everything we'd gathered with a fine-tooth comb, tracing money trails, identifying patterns, documenting every illegal transaction. The case we were building was ironclad. Richard had been sloppy, arrogant maybe, thinking he'd never get caught. He'd left a paper trail a mile wide, and now that trail was going to lead him straight to prison. Through all of this, I still had to go home every night and pretend nothing had changed. Richard would come back from his trips and ask about my week, and I'd smile and tell him about the nothing I'd done. He had no idea that I was building a case against him, that I was talking to lawyers and accountants and other victims. He thought I was still his trusting wife, still the woman he could manipulate and control. The cognitive dissonance of it was exhausting, but I held on to the knowledge that it would all be over soon. Justice was coming, and when it arrived, it was going to hit him like a freight train. One night in early September, Richard came home from what he said was a quick overnight trip to Phoenix. He was in a good mood, whistling as he unpacked his suitcase, telling me about a deal he'd closed. I watched him from the doorway of our bedroom, this man I'd spent 30 years with, this stranger I'd never really known. And I thought about how many times he'd stood in this same spot, in this same room, lying to my face with a smile. How many times he'd looked me in the eye and made me doubt my own reality. How many times he'd stolen from me while telling me he loved me. I'd planned to wait until Patricia said our case was ready, until every piece of evidence was in place. But standing there watching him whistle and smile and lie, something in me broke. Or maybe it finally healed. Either way, I couldn't keep pretending for one more day. So I walked into the room, stood between him and his suitcase, and I said we needed to talk. He looked at me, still smiling, and said, "Sure. What's up?" Like this was going to be a conversation about dinner plans or weekend activities. Like everything was fine. I told him I knew. Just that, at first. I knew. And I watched his face change, watched the smile falter and confusion replace it. "Knew what?" he asked, and I could already hear the defensive edge in his voice. "I knew about the forged signatures," I said, "the secret accounts, the money he'd been stealing, the business trips that weren't really business trips, everything." I laid it out calmly, factually, watching his expression go from confusion to denial to something that might have been fear. He started to speak, started to explain, started to tell me I was wrong, that I was misunderstanding, that there was a reasonable explanation for all of it. But I cut him off. I told him I had documentation, photos, bank statements, testimony from other women he'd done this to. I told him I'd talked to lawyers, to forensic accountants, to people who knew exactly what he'd been doing and could prove it. I told him that in 24 hours I was going to the police to file a formal complaint for fraud and forgery. And then I told him to get out of our house. Not his house. Our house. The house I'd helped pay for with money he'd stolen from me. "Get out," I said, and my voice was steady and cold and final. He tried to argue, tried to convince me to listen to him, tried to deploy all his usual manipulation tactics. But they didn't work anymore. I wasn't the woman he'd married, the woman who doubted herself and deferred to him. I'd become someone new, someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth. So I repeated myself, "Get out. Now. Or I call the police right now instead of tomorrow." He must have seen something in my face that told him I meant it, because after a long moment, he grabbed his suitcase and walked out. I locked the door behind him, and then I stood in the silent house and finally let myself cry. Not because I was sad, because I was free. The next morning, I met Patricia at the police station downtown. We filed a formal complaint, turned over all our evidence, gave statements. The detective we talked to was a woman in her 40s who listened with a grave expression and then said she'd start an investigation immediately. "Cases like this," she said, "they take them seriously now. Financial elder abuse, fraud, forgery. These weren't victimless crimes." She said I was brave for coming forward, that a lot of people in my situation stayed silent out of shame or fear. I told her I wasn't brave, just angry, and I was tired of being a victim. Over the following weeks, the investigation moved faster than I expected. The evidence was overwhelming, the pattern undeniable. Richard was arrested on multiple counts of fraud and forgery. I wasn't there when it happened, but Patricia called to tell me. I remember sitting on my porch when I got the news, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd lived for 25 years, and feeling this strange mix of emotions. Relief, satisfaction, sadness, anger, grief. All of it at once. My marriage was over. The life I'd known was over. But I was still here, still standing, and that had to count for something. The legal process dragged on for months. Arraignments, hearings, plea negotiations. Richard tried at first to maintain his innocence, hired an expensive lawyer, put on a show for the court. But the evidence was too strong. Eventually, his lawyer convinced him to take a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts in exchange for a reduced sentence. He got 5 years in prison, restitution to his victims, and permanent damage to his reputation and career. It wasn't enough, maybe. No punishment could really undo what he'd done. But it was something. It was justice of a kind. Through all of this, I had support I didn't expect. The other women Richard had victimized, Jennifer and the others, we stayed in touch. We'd text each other updates, meet for coffee, share our experiences. We became a strange little support group, bonded by trauma, but also by survival. We'd all been through hell, but we'd come out the other side. And we'd done it by refusing to stay silent, by choosing to fight back instead of accepting what had been done to us. That solidarity meant more to me than I can express. My family rallied around me, too. My sister especially. She was there for every court date, every difficult moment, every time I needed to talk or cry or just sit in silence with someone who understood. She helped me pack up Richard's things, helped me redecorate the house to make it feel like mine instead of ours, helped me start imagining what my future might look like now that I wasn't tied to a man who'd been using me for decades. I don't know what I would have done without her, but the person who really changed my perspective was Sarah, my faith leader from church. I'd grown up religious, but had drifted away from it over the years, mostly because Richard always found reasons why we couldn't make it to services. Looking back, I see that as one more way he isolated me. But after everything happened, I started going back. And Sarah, she didn't just offer me platitudes or tell me to forgive and forget. She listened. She validated my anger. She told me that faith didn't mean being a doormat, that God doesn't want us to accept abuse in the name of love. She helped me see that fighting for myself, demanding justice, that wasn't contrary to my faith. It was an expression of it. It was Sarah who first suggested I consider moving away, starting fresh somewhere new. She said sometimes we need to physically remove ourselves from the places where trauma happened in order to truly heal. At first I resisted the idea. This was my home, my neighborhood, my life. Why should I be the one to leave when Richard was the criminal? But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Every corner of that house held memories I didn't want anymore. Every street in our neighborhood reminded me of the life I'd lost. If I wanted to truly rebuild, maybe I needed a blank slate. So I put the house on the market. It sold faster than I expected, which I guess says something about the LA real estate market even in difficult times. I used the proceeds to buy a small place up the coast, a little cottage in a quiet town where nobody knew my story, where I could be anonymous and peaceful. I packed up 30 years of my life into boxes, kept what mattered, and donated or threw away the rest. It was cathartic, that purge. Every item I got rid of felt like shedding weight I'd been carrying too long. The day I moved out, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. I thought I'd feel sad, nostalgic maybe, but what I felt was relief. This house had been beautiful, but it had also been a prison. I'd been trapped here by lies and manipulation, by my own inability to see what was right in front of me. Now I was leaving, and I was doing it on my own terms. I was choosing my next chapter instead of having it chosen for me. That felt powerful in a way I hadn't expected. My new place is smaller, simpler. Just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a porch that overlooks the ocean. I can hear waves at night when I sleep with the windows open. It's quiet here in a way Los Angeles never was, and at first the quiet was unnerving. I'd gotten so used to noise, to chaos, to the constant hum of anxiety that had become my baseline. But gradually, I've learned to appreciate the silence. It's healing, that quiet. It gives me space to think, to process, to figure out who I am now that I'm not Richard's wife anymore. I've started doing things I never did before. Small things, but they feel significant. I take morning walks on the beach. I've joined a book club at the local library. I'm learning to paint, badly, but that's not really the point. The point is that I'm trying things, experimenting, figuring out what brings me joy. For so many years, my life revolved around Richard and his needs, his schedule, his priorities. Now my life is mine. I get to decide what matters, what I do with my time, who I spend it with. The freedom of that is almost overwhelming sometimes. I won't lie and say it's been easy. There are hard days, days when the anger comes back, and I want to scream at the unfairness of it all. Days when I miss the version of my life I thought I had, even though I know it was an illusion. Days when I feel lonely or scared or uncertain about the future. But those days are getting fewer. And even on the hard days, I know something I didn't know before. I know I can survive. I know I'm stronger than I thought. I know I don't need anyone else to validate my reality or tell me I'm enough. I already am. A few months ago, I was at a local farmer's market buying vegetables for dinner when I struck up a conversation with the woman running one of the stands. Her name is Patricia, different from my lawyer Patricia, and she's around my age. We got to talking, and she mentioned she was part of a group that helps women who've experienced domestic abuse or financial exploitation. They provide resources, support, advocacy. She asked if I might be interested in getting involved, maybe sharing my story with other women who are going through what I went through. I thought about it for a few days before I said yes. The idea of reliving my trauma, even to help others, was daunting. But I realized that my story has power, not just for me, but for other women who might be in the early stages of what I experienced. Women who are starting to notice red flags, but aren't sure if they're overreacting. Women who are being gaslit and manipulated and told they're crazy. If I can reach even one person and help them see what's happening before it's too late, then maybe all this pain will have served some purpose. So I've started volunteering with the group. I go to meetings, I talk to women who've reached out for help, I share resources and strategies, and I tell my story. Over and over, I tell it, and each time it gets a little easier. Each time I feel a little less like a victim and a little more like a survivor. The women I talk to, they thank me for being honest, for not sugarcoating how hard it is. They tell me I give them hope that they can get through it too. And that means more to me than I can say. Turning my pain into something useful, something that helps others, that's been crucial to my healing. One of the things I've learned through this process is how common financial exploitation really is. I mentioned earlier that statistic about Los Angeles and mandatory reporting, how cases increased 6 times after laws changed. That number has stuck with me. It means so many people are experiencing what I experienced, and for so long they weren't even able to report it. The systems weren't in place to protect them. And even now, with better laws, there's still so much stigma around admitting you've been victimized this way. People feel ashamed, stupid, weak. I know because I felt all those things too. But here's what I want everyone to know. Financial exploitation, fraud, forgery, these aren't crimes that happen because the victim is stupid or weak. They happen because the perpetrator is manipulative and calculating. Richard didn't target me because I was dumb. He targeted me because I was trusting, because I loved him, because I wanted to believe in our marriage. Those aren't weaknesses. Those are human qualities. And abusers, they exploit those qualities. They twist love into a weapon. That's on them, not on us. I also learned through my research and through talking to experts that manipulators use very specific tactics. Gaslighting, where they make you doubt your own memory and perceptions. Isolation, where they cut you off from people who might help you see the truth. Financial control, where they make you dependent on them. Love bombing, where they shower you with affection to keep you hooked. These aren't random behaviors. They're calculated strategies that abusers use to maintain power over their victims. And once you know what to look for, once you can name these tactics, it becomes so much harder for them to work on you. That's why I think education is so crucial. We need to teach people, especially women, how to recognize these red flags early. We need to talk openly about financial exploitation, about emotional abuse, about all the ways that predators operate. We need to create spaces where victims can come forward without shame, where they'll be believed and supported instead of blamed or dismissed. We need better laws, better enforcement, better resources for people trying to escape these situations. And we need to hold abusers accountable, not just socially but legally. Prison time, restitution, real consequences. Because without that accountability, they just move on to the next victim. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. I want to talk about the tactics manipulators use, because understanding these patterns could save you or someone you love from falling into a similar trap. Richard didn't just stumble into fraud. He used specific, deliberate strategies that are common among people who exploit others financially and emotionally. First, there's isolation. Richard slowly cut me off from my support system. It wasn't obvious at first. He'd make comments about my friends being negative influences. He'd schedule things that conflicted with family gatherings. He'd discourage me from pursuing hobbies or activities that connected me with other people. Over time, my world shrank until he was the center of it. And when you're isolated like that, when someone is your primary source of information and validation, it becomes much easier for them to control your reality. Then there's gaslighting, which is probably the most insidious tactic of all. Richard would do or say things and then deny they ever happened. He'd move objects and then act confused when I couldn't find them. He'd make plans and then claim I'd misunderstood. He'd contradict himself and then insist I was the one misremembering. Over years, this constant undermining of my perceptions made me doubt everything I thought I knew. I'd question my own memory, my own sanity. That doubt made me vulnerable, made me more likely to accept his version of reality, even when it contradicted what my instincts were telling me. Financial control was another major tactic. By insisting that he handle all our finances, Richard maintained power over me. I didn't know where our money was, how much we had, where it was going. That kept me dependent on him, and it made it easier for him to hide what he was doing because I wasn't looking at the accounts regularly. Financial transparency is so important in relationships. You should know where the money is, where it's coming from, where it's going. If your partner resists that transparency, that's a huge red flag. Love bombing is another common strategy. After incidents where Richard would gaslight me or we'd have conflicts, he'd suddenly become super affectionate and attentive. He'd bring me flowers, plan romantic dinners, tell me how much he loved me. Those moments of intense positive attention would make me forget my doubts, would make me think maybe I was overreacting, maybe things weren't so bad. It's a way of keeping victims hooked, of creating a cycle where the intermittent rewards make the abuse more tolerable. Manipulators also use something called DARVO, which stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. When confronted with their behavior, they deny it ever happened. Then they attack you for bringing it up, accusing you of being paranoid or controlling or making things up. And finally, they flip the script entirely, making themselves the victim and you the aggressor. Richard did this constantly. Anytime I questioned him about inconsistencies or concerns, he'd turn it around on me. He'd say I was being suspicious, that I didn't trust him, that my accusations were hurting him. And I'd end up apologizing for questioning him, even though my instincts were right. One thing that really struck me when I started learning about these tactics is how systematic they are. Richard wasn't unique. He was using strategies that abusers have used for generations. There are books about this, studies, experts who can break down exactly how manipulation works. And the more I learned, the less personal it felt. This wasn't about me being weak or stupid. This was about Richard being a textbook abuser who'd learned how to exploit people. That realization was both devastating and liberating. I also learned that financial exploitation often escalates gradually. It starts small. Maybe your partner asks to borrow a small amount of money and doesn't pay it back. Maybe they start handling one bill and then gradually take over all of them. Maybe they open a credit card in your name just for emergencies and then run up charges without telling you. These small incursions into your financial autonomy become normalized, and before you know it, they have complete control. That's why it's so important to maintain boundaries around money, to keep your own accounts, to monitor your credit regularly. Another crucial thing is recognizing the role of enablers. Richard had people in his life who knew, or should have known, what he was doing. Business associates who saw the questionable transactions. Family members who heard him lie and said nothing. Friends who noticed inconsistencies but didn't speak up. These people, sometimes called flying monkeys in abuse dynamics, they help the abuser maintain their facade. They provide plausible deniability. They gaslight the victim on the abuser's behalf. They pressure the victim to forgive or stay quiet. Being aware of these dynamics can help you see the full picture of what's happening. I want to emphasize that if you recognize these patterns in your own relationship, it's not too late to get help. Start by documenting everything. Take photos of important documents, keep records of conversations, Open a separate email account your partner doesn't know about and send yourself evidence. Build a paper trail, then reach out to someone you trust, a friend, a family member, a professional. There are organizations that specialize in helping people escape financial exploitation and abusive relationships. Use them. Don't try to handle this alone. Also, know your legal rights. Laws vary by state, but there are protections in place for victims of financial exploitation, especially for older adults. Mandatory reporting laws mean that professionals like doctors, social workers, and bank employees are required to report suspected abuse. There are restraining orders you can get, legal mechanisms to freeze accounts, ways to reclaim money that's been stolen. A good lawyer who specializes in family law or elder abuse can help you navigate these options. Don't assume you have no recourse. You have more power than you think. And if you know someone who might be experiencing this, speak up. I know it's uncomfortable. I know you might worry about overstepping or being wrong, but the cost of staying silent is too high. Approach them with compassion, not judgment. Let them know you're there for them, that you believe them, that you'll support them in whatever they decide to do. Don't push them to leave before they're ready, because that can actually be dangerous. But plant seeds, provide information, be a consistent presence. Sometimes just knowing someone cares can make all the difference. One statistic that really haunts me is that the FBI reported Mexican cartels stole over $300 million from American seniors in timeshare scams alone. $300 million. And that's just one type of scam, one demographic of victims. The scope of financial exploitation in this country is staggering. And the victims aren't just seniors, though they're particularly vulnerable. It's people of all ages, all backgrounds. Anyone who trusts the wrong person can end up in this situation. That's why awareness is so critical. We need to talk about this openly, without shame, so people know what to watch for. I've also learned that recovery is possible, but it takes time and effort. You don't just bounce back from decades of manipulation and betrayal. You have to rebuild your sense of self, relearn how to trust your own judgment, figure out who you are outside the context of the abusive relationship. Therapy helps. Support groups help. Time helps. But you also have to be patient with yourself. There will be setbacks, moments when you doubt your decision to leave, times when you feel lonely or scared or uncertain. That's all normal. Healing isn't linear. You just have to keep moving forward, one day at a time. For me, one of the hardest parts has been learning to trust again. Not just trusting other people, but trusting myself. For so long, Richard convinced me I couldn't trust my own perceptions, my own memory, my own instincts. Undoing that damage has been a slow process. I second-guess myself constantly. I question whether I'm making the right decisions. I wonder if I'm being paranoid or if I'm genuinely seeing red flags. It's exhausting, that constant self-doubt, but it's getting better. Slowly, I'm learning to listen to my gut again, to trust that little voice inside that says something's off. And every time I do that, and it turns out I was right, it reinforces that I can trust myself. I've also had to grieve the life I thought I had. That's something people don't always talk about when discussing leaving an abusive relationship. Yes, you're escaping something bad, but you're also losing something that felt real, at least in moments. I had to mourn the marriage I thought I had, the partner I thought Richard was, the future I thought we were building together. That grief is real and valid, even though intellectually I know those things were never real to begin with. The heart doesn't always listen to logic. So I've let myself feel that sadness, that loss, while also knowing I made the right choice. Building a new life has meant figuring out who I am now, at 55, without the identity of being Richard's wife. For 30 years, that's how I defined myself. Now I'm just me. And honestly, I'm still figuring out what that means. I'm rediscovering interests I abandoned decades ago. I'm trying new things. I'm meeting new people who know me only as who I am now, not as who I was before. It's both terrifying and exhilarating. There's a freedom in reinventing yourself, in not being constrained by who you've always been or who others expected you to be. One thing that's helped me immensely is connecting with other survivors. Not just the women who were victimized by Richard, but broader communities of people who've experienced financial exploitation and abuse. There's something powerful about talking to people who really understand what you went through, who don't need you to explain or justify your experiences. They just get it. And seeing others further along in their recovery journey, seeing them thriving and happy and free, that gives me hope that I can get there too. We lift each other up, we share resources and strategies, we celebrate victories and comfort each other through setbacks. That community has been invaluable. I also want to say that if you're reading this and thinking about someone in your life who might be going through something similar, trust your instincts. If something feels off about their relationship, if they seem isolated or controlled or different from how they used to be, there's probably a reason for that. Reach out. Let them know you're there. You might be the lifeline they need, even if they're not ready to grab it yet. Sometimes just knowing someone cares, someone sees what's happening, that can be enough to give a victim the courage to eventually leave. And if you're the one going through it, if you're reading this and seeing your own life reflected in my story, please know that you're not alone. What's happening to you has a name. It's abuse. It's exploitation. It's not your fault, and you don't deserve it. No matter what he's told you, no matter how he's twisted reality, you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. Your feelings are valid. Your perceptions are real. Trust yourself. Document what's happening. Reach out for help. And know that there's a life waiting for you on the other side of this, a life where you're free and safe and in control of your own destiny. I promise you, it's worth fighting for. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear. Some of it was probably uncomfortable, maybe even triggering if you've experienced something similar. But I believe it's important to talk about these things, to shine a light on the dark corners where abuse thrives. Silence protects abusers. Speaking up protects victims. So I'm speaking up, and I hope my story empowers you to do the same if you need to. I'd love to hear from you. What city are you in? What time is it where you are right now? Drop a comment and let me know. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and maybe my experience will help someone who really needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I'll keep sharing real stories about real people navigating hard situations. We're all just trying to figure this life out together. What would you have done in my place? If you discovered your partner had been forging your signature and stealing from you for years, what would your next move be? I'm genuinely curious. Everyone's situation is different, and there's no one right answer. Tell me in the comments what you think. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, share it with them. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone, that others have walked this path before us and survived. Before you go, I want to recommend a couple of other videos you might find helpful. There's one about recognizing gaslighting in relationships that goes deeper into those manipulation tactics I mentioned. And another about financial red flags to watch for if you're worried about exploitation. Both of those might give you tools and information that could be useful, either for yourself or for someone you care about. I'll leave you with this. Your life is yours. Your money is yours. Your reality is yours. Don't let anyone take those things from you. Set boundaries. Trust your instincts. Demand transparency. And if someone in your life is trying to control or manipulate you, know that you have the power to walk away. It won't be easy. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but you're stronger than you know, and you deserve a life built on truth, not lies. Until the next story, take care of your heart, and remember, speaking up isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do.